I'm here to talk to you a little bit more about things that are outside of the world of tech, but actually how tech can solve some very big problems that we have in this world. I'll leave the introduction to Octopus Energy towards the end, as I think the next handful of slides will kind of show what we're doing and why we're working on this enormous problem. So I hope this looks familiar. This is our beautiful planet. We only get one of these, and it is such a complex ecosystem. When we think about all the things we do on a day-to-day basis, and I guess here in the Python community, all the complex code that we write, honestly, this is the most complex ecosystem that we could ever imagine. And yet all the pieces seem to be working well together when it comes to how the system was originally built. We just have such a wide diversity of life on this planet, and the elements and how they interact with each other is just so wonderful. You know, we see that complexity and that beauty happen at the most individual and micro level, as well as even the biggest level. There's just such extreme interaction with how all these different pieces play with each other. And that leads us to this. That leads us to our atmosphere, which, when we think about the relative size of our atmosphere and everything that it holds within it, it's as big and as thick as just the skin of an apple on top of that apple. So while when we look up in the stars and the clouds and we think that we have a limitless atmosphere above us, we actually have a very fragile system that keeps us in this very beautiful world that we live on. And that's the next challenge I want to talk to you about. We're dealing with one of the biggest challenges we've ever known to man. This climate crisis is here. It's not a problem of the future. It's a problem of today. And it requires action today. It requires us to think about what we're doing and why we're doing it. And it's just impacting so many people on such a fundamental level. And yet we've only kind of seen the beginning of this problem. We're already seeing just core pieces of our ecosystems becoming extremely stressed. You know, whether it's the ocean, which is absorbing a disproportionate amount of carbon dioxide and heat, and the impact that has to life and ecosystems in that ocean, where over 70% of all of life on Earth lives, or whether it's the floods and wildfires that we've been seeing on a much more frequent basis over the past few years. And as developers, we all are very focused on numbers. We're all focused on data. And we can see that this is a statistically significant warming that's happening. This is very clearly something that is not within the statistical mean of what we should be expecting. And it's very clear that we are the leading contributor to this problem, and thus need to be the solution to this problem. With everything that we've been seeing in the past handful of decades with warming, the most recent events that we've seen over the past few years is actually just a function of a lot of the carbon dioxide that we've been emitting as a species over the past few decades. And yet we're not on a path to change, because every single molecule that we burn and turn into carbon dioxide has a lasting impact on just the next several decades. And we've seen a lot of this reporting, right? We've heard about the IPCC. We've seen that many scientists who study this topic every single day, and our specialists in this topic are trying to loudly tell us how we are running out of time. And I think it's very important that we feel that we can all be part of the solution and not just part of the problem. As many of us may live in California or even on coastal communities, we feel the implications of this climate change, and it is real. It is not something that happens every once in a while. Fire season is now never ending. It's not just a handful of months in the fall or in the summer. It is a 12-month cycle. And we're seeing flooding in coastal communities on a nonstop basis. Even places like Miami have what they call sunny day flooding, where we see high tides are creating environments where humans can no longer successfully live in those communities. And historically, we've looked to a lot of our governments to solve this problem. But the challenge is that governments are very slow to respond. You may all be familiar with the COP26 event that recently happened this past summer. And while it was a very exciting event going into it, it was actually very disappointing coming out of it. We saw several countries not even able to agree that we should stop burning coal. We have several countries that are petrochemical states or petrostates that are authoritarian governments and use these fossil fuels as ways to power the way that they operate their countries. And ultimately, if we are fully focused on governments to resolve our issues, we're going to run out of time. Now, we definitely need their support, but we need to do more than just that. We need to focus on how we can all contribute to the solution. And so ultimately, the IPCC has called this a code red for humanity. And if this is a code red for humanity, which has tools to manage and adapt, then this is even more of an issue for the millions of types of life on this planet that require very specific types of ecosystems in order for them to live. So this is a code red for all of this entire world. Now, I know that was a very sobering message, and I know that it can be a very odd message to hear as an introduction to an organization or to an individual such as myself. But I just want to kind of context what the problem is at hand and how real of a problem this is. This is not a problem for somebody else to go fix, and this is not a problem for the future. This is a problem for today, and this is a problem for us to fix as citizens of this planet. And there is real reason to have hope. We see things like Moore's Law create new opportunities in the world of technology, where tech has significantly more capabilities at a much cheaper price point. And we're seeing very similar things happen in the world of decarbonization. And there is very real reason to have hope that we can come together and pull talents from very different industries to contribute to be part of a very real solution to this problem. One of the interesting things that has happened recently is that fossil fuels are no longer the cheapest source of energies. We see fossil fuels as a highly inflationary type of product. That means that it relies on an industry mechanism and an economic mechanism. That ultimately means that it needs to be more expensive each year in order for fossil fuels to financially work. Whereas renewable energy and technology is actually extremely deflationary. We're seeing more and more capabilities each year as more and more production happens, because we have a learning curve and a manufacturing curve that's built around scale and not about just the cheapest well or the cheapest way to deliver a molecule. And we've seen this come down in the world of renewable energy just year after year. Even the IEA has made forecasts that have been consistently incorrect as far as how much it costs to get the incremental electron from renewable energy. We are currently able to deliver low cost, carbon-free electrons at prices that we didn't think we would even be able to get to until 2050. And so this is extremely exciting that we've been able to significantly lower the cost curve on renewable energy and significantly bring on more and more renewables because it's financially the best thing to do, as well as morally the best thing to do as well. So I'm an energy nerd, so I apologize that this is now going to get a little bit energy intensive, but this is the big solution to our problem. And so let me kind of give you guys some more context to the things that we see every single day. And the more that people see this, the more that they realize that there actually is a very real solution to this problem. So just the past decade or so, we've seen an exponential growth in the number of megawatts of solar installed. Now this is hardware, right? Hardware is hard, and yet we're still seeing an exponential growth pattern in that hardware deployment. And a lot of that is because we are learning how to do it better. And a lot of it too is that we're building the scale and manufacturing capabilities of enabling that additional manufacturing plant to be that much cheaper. And so what we're seeing is just a significant outlay, not just historically of solar, but also going forward. This is a little bit of a case study of Texas. And Texas, as you may know, isn't normally thought of as being the hub of renewable energy. But in fact, it probably will be one of the first states to fully decarbonize. And what's wonderful is that it's because it's also the cheapest thing to do within the state. So you kind of see in the beginning, or currently, we see what we call fossils and nuclear to be a large percentage of our overall generation stack. But even compared to 5 years ago, wind and solar has kind of 10x over the past 5 years. We've seen a significant amount of renewable energy come online over the past 5 years. So that way, over 30% of our generation in Texas comes from renewable energy. We have as much renewable energy generation as places like California, and even more than places like New York. And it's because we see so much investment into the new economics of these power plants, simply because we've learned how to make them at such low cost compared to traditional fossil fuel and gas power plants that rely on inflationary models in order to make their projects work. And so when we look at the future grid, we see a little bit more fossil fuel and nuclear coming online, and I actually doubt that they'll actually come online because of a whole bunch of reasons. But we also see a significant amount of wind and solar coming online. You can see in the yellow here, we're looking to 10x the amount of solar over the next 18 months coming onto the grid, as well as bring on a huge piece of battery storage. And I like battery storage, and it's a big piece of the future. And I'll kind of get into how I think about batteries versus other types of solutions to decarbonize our grid. So all of this wind and solar, and especially solar coming online, actually means that the grid is also changing, right? Again, I'm an energy nerd, so we're going to get into a little bit of how this all works. So the way the grid used to work, and we're kind of moving off of this old pattern, is around what we call the bulk power system. You could only buy a coal power plant or a gas power plant in one size, one big power plant. That's all you can do, because that's what you need in order to make the economies of scale to work. But solar and storage are Legos. Once you kind of build a very small minimum volume, you get the cost efficiency as you construct the projects. So we're actually moving not just to a highly decarbonated world, we're also moving into a world that has a very different nature to the way that energy is supplied and how it's delivered onto the grid, and ultimately what that means for how software can amplify all of that. So this distributed nature of solar and storage means that we're no longer building these massive power plants. We're building little Lego-like projects to wherever we can interconnect and fit these power plants onto the grid. And so what that means is that the skills of the future are also very different. The skills of the future are about bringing on these projects quickly and modularly, and then adapting to the unique features of these solar and wind projects. And so what we're likely to see over the next handful of years here is that renewable energy is the future of all energy. We're going to see renewables as not just the cleanest source of energy, but also the cheapest form of energy. And when that happens, we no longer have to convince others that renewables are good and that we have a carbon issue. We just have to talk to everyone in this country that saving money is a good thing. And that is a great feature because yes, I wake up every single day to decarbonize this world. But if I can get everyone who may not agree with me to follow suit just because it's the cheapest option, then we'll get to a place where we're fully decarbonizing every single person's energy. And so this element has two pieces to it. One of them is we need to fully decarbonize all the supply side generation. All the power plants are rapidly moving to renewable energy. And then at the same time, on the demand side, on the load side, we are electrifying appliances and transportation and hot water, and everything you can imagine has an electrical option that's no longer about burning fossil fuels at the device. And in that 1-2 powerful combination, we're able to both electrify and get away from the molecules at the source, as well as decarbonize and get away from the molecules at the supply, at the generation. And so we're able to do things like electric vehicles and decarbonize somebody's transportation through that 1-2 combination of electrification and renewable energy. And so that leads me to the second point of this conversation of why we should have hope, is that we now live in a world of advanced software capabilities to go do things that traditional energy products aren't meant to do. And what I mean by that is technology is the key to unlocking all of this renewable energy. And the reason is that renewables have this incredible feature to them. When it's windy and when it's sunny, we get an overabundance of electrons. And when those are available, we need to learn how to use them up as fast as possible. And sure, some people may look at the signal manually and manage how and when they use electricity. But to the extent that we have best-in-class technology on the software side, and we can automate how and when people use their electricity, well, then that's how we're able to absorb every single last carbon-free electron on the grid. And that's how we truly decarbonize the electricity stack. So we're seeing how the grid is becoming more and more decentralized as another key theme, right? Everyone's probably at some point considered or know somebody who has considered getting solar for their house. We're hearing all the time about different battery storage options for the house or for the business. And so this decentralization also means that not only is the supply side of our grid becoming more decentralized, meaning all of those solar projects that are now becoming much more distributed as far as how and when they produce electricity. But we're also seeing millions and millions of devices coming online that are controllable through APIs. And that element allows us to dynamically manage this highly fragmented distributed grid in such a different way that the traditional power systems were never, ever envisioned for. And so that's what we're doing here at Octopus. We are creating a world where we are reimagining the energy system. Our software stack here is called Kraken. And you might have met Danny from the talk that he gave yesterday. And he leads engineering here for Octopus Energy US. And in that, we are rethinking every single component of how energy works on this grid. We are thinking about electric vehicles and how they can dynamically charge based on real-time grid conditions, as well as sell back to the grid, because effectively they're batteries just on wheels. So why not be able to unlock the power two ways? Or your thermostat or hot water heater. Those are effectively just thermal batteries that they control, whether it's the air in your house or the water that you use for a hot shower. And if we can more optimally time when that thermal battery charges, then we can really enhance when and how power is being drawn from the grid based on when we're seeing renewables being abundant. And you kind of take this out and you imagine millions of customers with tens of millions of devices. Well, that becomes a very different type of engineering problem than the grid of the past, which is just this command and control centralized system full of one or two very large power plants that were ultimately the only way that grid managers could ever keep frequency on the grid to be in sync on both the supply and demand side. Now we have two different controls. We can control both the supply as well as the demand side of the equation. And so that's effectively what we're building. We're moving away from this one-way grid model where you have these large power plants and they historically used to compensate the largest consumers because it's just like a shopping mall. You need an anchor tenant to securely buy all that power. And so you're giving the largest customer the cheapest price because you just want to be sure that they're going to be there to buy the power. Whereas the grid of the future is actually very different. We could have the most flexible customers, the most automated customers, the most intelligent customers. Those are the ones that are extracting the cheapest electrons onto the grid. And that flexibility allows them to just have not only the cheapest cost in their house, but also the lowest carbon footprint, because the times of the day that are the cheapest are the times of the day when it's windy and sunny and the grid is being overly supplied with all these cheap carbon-free electrons. And so that's what this journey of Octopus is all about, how to unlock all of these beautiful tools to work with each other. Now, Danny, as you kind of met yesterday during his talk, might have talked a bit about all the different components that we're moving on to, but effectively we are a Django-based shop. We're on what is effectively the most modern set of tools, because many of our competitors, in fact, many of our incumbents in this industry, have bought on-prem systems from the 90s and are still operating antiquated systems. And you can't solve future problems with tools of the past. What we're seeing is that the problems of the future are just very different in nature and require a very different approach to how technology is built and ultimately what the use cases are delivered upon. And so this Kraken software enables us to do a handful of things. First, it enables us as Octopus to deliver a beautiful and consumer-friendly experience. We think that this is one of the largest opportunities within energy. If we're going to decentralize the grid, if we're going to control tens of millions of devices to be in sync and harmonious with the grid, then we need customer trust. And this is such an old industry that has never built customer trust in the past. This is an industry relied upon monopolistic type of behavior. It's an industry that relies upon taking customers for granted. And there's actually a very low trust in this industry that consumers have with many of the current incumbents in the market. And so having a technology-centric platform internally allows us to have data-centric approaches to how to serve a customer and not have a Frankenstein type of system that was never really built that all of our to serve this type of use case, which is what all of our competitors, incumbents tend to be using in this industry. Just a little bit more about that. So we do two things at Octopus. We have a very consumer-centric brand. So if you come to our website, you'll see that. But really what we do is we put all of that magic on the back end. And that magic is a piece of that's called Kraken. And Kraken is our software stack that allows us to seamlessly support customers in a way that's very non-traditional in this market. We also license Kraken to other companies because what we see is that there is such a large need in this industry for better and modern tools that incumbent technology providers just are not ready to serve. And so our ability to help other organizations break free from the traditional and very stodgy tools that just aren't flexible and allow their customers to also be part of this energy transition is very exciting because it allows us as a technology-centric company to learn from both what our own requirements are as well as what other companies' requirements are to really build the best product possible. So we are in about 9 different countries. So if you're not in the US, you should definitely learn to see if what our footprint is outside the US. We're very eager to hire great people who bring what I call their superpower into our organization. But here in the US, we are primarily focused in what we call restructured states, sometimes called deregulated states. And this is where consumers have choice. This is where the monopoly utility doesn't quite have a full monopoly. And so we as a third-party provider have a opportunity to be a customer choice. Now there are technologically based solutions that allow us to expand into other markets, and we are eagerly looking at what that looks like for the other half of the country. But we can serve load and participate as the trusted energy company of choice for over half of the US population just based on these handful of states. And then a bit about what I mean by bringing your superpower. So I really do believe that every single person in this world has a superpower. Everyone's great at something. And in this Python community, it's pretty clear what your superpowers are. Your superpowers are helping organizations get through puzzles and problems and use code and tools in a way that allows organizations to become even more successful and scalable. And so we are eagerly looking for people to join us in a lot of different functions, whatever their superpower is. But in this case, on the world of the back-end engineers, there is just so much that we can go do together and enable people to have purpose in what they do, and that everything that they do leads to a better future for everyone on this planet. I like to say that some people can be really lucky. There's a lot of opportunity out there to work for the big tech companies, to work for a lot of different types of organizations. But ultimately, if we think about the conversation at the beginning of this presentation, that may not matter, that your stock options or your 401k may not matter if we don't figure this out in the next handful of years. So I would invite everyone whether it's to work with us or any other company in this industry, I'd love to invite you to think about how you can put your superpowers to work to actually get us to a more hospitable future in this planet. So with that, thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Wow, thank you, Michael. Kicking it off sounds a little like rough, but it sounds like there's hope for what's going on. I'm excited about your organization. I want you to be in Indiana. I noticed Indiana wasn't in that map of the states, so I look forward to that becoming a possibility as well. We do have one question from the Slido, so I'll go ahead and pose that now for everyone. Some experts argue wind and solar can't replace fossil fuel fast enough, and only nuclear power can help us get off this oil addiction. What is your opinion?
I think that in this community of reducing carbon, we often have what some people call the circular firing squad. We try to make everything too perfect. And I am up for any carbon-free electron that we can get. Now, actually, I would answer the question the opposite of the premise, in that nuclear, unfortunately, is a product that we have a negative learning curve on, meaning we've built a whole bunch of nuclear power plants 30, 40, 50 years ago, and we have not successfully built one recently. In fact, there's one in South Carolina that is 3 times over budget. The people of South Carolina will be paying $30 billion for a nuclear plant to come online, because these are such complicated pieces of machinery, and the cost for being wrong is so large if you build it incorrectly, that there is a lot of engineering that needs to go into it. And we've lost that trade. The people who know this trade are, the Chinese are really good at it. They're launching a new one. I think almost every week there's 1 or 2 coming online, but they've had different strategic priorities. And so I'm happy to take carbon-free electrons. What I worry about is these nuclear plants, if we were to start from scratch today, will actually take a decade or so to come online based on current build schedules. And yes, we can speed that up by a couple of years if we just blow right through the permitting, but the engineering is really, really hard. And I don't see them as necessarily a practical short-term solution, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't pursue that in tandem. Whereas the solar and wind projects, they literally can go up in a matter of months, sometimes weeks when it comes to solar. So those are the ones that we can actually bring on the grid this year, next year, the year after. And so I get really excited about the speed and opportunity of those types of power plants.
Yeah, that does sound awesome. There was a similar question in the chat about small modular reactors, but I think you kind of covered that. It's like any carbon-free electron is a good one, but those ones that are nuclear are a little tricky.
I think, again, I'm very excited about all the developments in technology. I've been following some of those startups. I think we as a society have a really difficult time permitting nuclear reactors. And so whether it's a large one or a small one, a lot of people get very worried when someone comes to town and says, I want to install a 2 megawatt nuclear reactor down the street from you. That it's just the community engagement makes that a very difficult lift, no matter where it is. Whereas a 2 megawatt solar facility tends to not even fall on the radar. So I'm open to a lot of different solutions, especially depending on the timelines. But I do know that there's the engineering solution, and then there's actually the societal friction to getting things done. And I think that as we think about the softer qualitative components to building some of this stuff, it can be really, really challenging outside of the engineering solution.
So speaking of other solutions, are you optimistic? One of the other questions just came in is, are you optimistic about fusion?
The joke in this industry is that fusion's always 10 years away, even 30 years ago.
Right.
It feels 10 years away again. What I worry, again, I am open for every single carbon-free electron. What I don't want to do is put all our eggs in the basket that 10 years from now, it'll magically be figured out. That is an excuse to not do anything. And I think that incumbents who have a business model around polluting this world today get everyone really spun up about future solutions and get really excited about future solutions. And when they see solutions that are available today, their whole mantra is to spin up fear and doubt about why the solutions that are real today are not good enough. And we are here to be part of the solution and not part of the problem.
Not part of the problem. All right, 2 more questions. I'm going to flip the order though. How will the current chip and rare metals shortage impact solar growth?
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, the rare metals is more of an issue for batteries than it is for solar. Solar is at the core, it's just sand, right? So solar is a handful of cells. Those cells are effectively mono and polysilicon. And that is just a very specified type of sand that you're refining to create solar panels. So there is not much of an issue from that side, whereas on the lithium and cobalt side for batteries, that is becoming a bit more of an issue. And so where I see the challenges of batteries coming forth is that supply chain. But again, I think of software controls as an alternative to a battery, right? I think a lot of people get very excited about batteries today, and I'm very excited about batteries, but I also deprioritize batteries to using software, because if I can have a software solution to a problem, it's a lot cheaper than a hardware solution to a problem. And batteries are a hardware solution, whereas software is a software solution. So if we can just intelligently manage stuff, that is first priority. And then for things that don't have flexibility, that's where batteries come into.
All right. What smart energy products are you most excited about, and why are they the solution?
I am very excited about the fact that, I know this sounds odd, but everything we buy has an IoT capability. Like, think about it. If anyone bought a middle of the line washer dryer in the past 12 months, it probably comes with an app. And you're like, why does my washer dryer come with an app? That doesn't make any sense. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, if it has an app, then that means it has controllability to it. And if it has controllability to it through an API, then I can just dynamically, as a third party, manage how and when that cycle starts, given some range and specification. And based on that, I can optimally time and extract a lot of cost savings and pass that down to customers. So what I'm really excited about is that we are seeing consumer adoption to the technologies that we want to control just naturally, and then we can amplify the value for those customers. And so that was a non-answer, but that is actually a real answer. I think the other components are electric vehicles. I actually don't drive the vehicles or car. I take the bus to work. But for those people who do drive as part of the way that they get around, then I am very excited that we can electrify that transportation and we can decarbonize the stack behind it. And so, and that people are buying those regardless of everything else.
It feels like that adoption rate is way faster than I thought it was going to go for electric vehicles, which is exciting.
It's, in this industry, we've seen it with solar. We're now seeing it with storage. And now we're about to see it with EVs. And things are really hard. And then all of a sudden it's like, you get a little bit of momentum. And then all of a sudden you can't keep up with demand. And we've already hit that inflection point with solar. We are about hitting that inflection point with storage right now. And EVs are in that inflection point as we speak too. So yeah, it's such a fun industry to be part of all these macro tailwinds and writing them all to a better future.
That is great. If you've got time, there's a couple more questions. The people are really interested in this. So I'm going to hit you up. So there's some open standards and some open source technologies in the renewable energy field that are emerging, both in software and hardware. So I think it's a question, are there open standards and open software and open technologies in this emerging field that people should be aware of?
Yeah, and we need more, right? Because when you have open standards, you have even better outcomes. We see it on what are called inverter-based resources. So that's going to be your solar, that's going to be your storage. There's an IEEE standard called 2030.5 that allows for, third parties to have visibility and controllability of those inverters. What we haven't quite seen yet is a full standard for smart home devices. We kind of see that as a manufacturer or even asset by asset basis. And that's fine. We spend our time all day long coding into those APIs, and that's just part of the process. We've seen some companies join together and talk about a total home solution on that standard. But I think that, we're at a really interesting point because we have a lot of people who are very passionate about the technology, and they're not quite aware of all the wonderful things that this technology can do. And so it's a matter of finding really bright individuals who understand software, understand APIs, understand also our industry, and bridge that knowledge gap to these manufacturers and to these people who are setting code standards. So that way they can think about how all this technology can be unlocked. So that's a big piece of our advocacy. We do regulatory advocacy on the energy side, and we are also doing advocacy on the hardware side.
That's awesome. One last question. So do you see the growth of renewables exceeding the increased demand for electricity from EVs? What's your predictions there?
Yeah, it's very exciting. And it's not just EVs. I showed a picture of a heat pump on my prior slide, and a heat pump is effectively an air conditioner run backwards, right? We actually all have heat pumps in our houses. It's called your refrigerator, and it takes heat out of your refrigerator and it just dumps it into your house. Well, if you could just take that and scale it up and make it outside of your house and takes all the heat from the outside and dumps it in your house, well, then you got a reverse air conditioner. So we see the electrification of everything happening in heat. We see it happening in cooking and through induction stoves, and we see it on EVs. So we see a massive increase in electricity usage potential. Even more important to be in the middle of that and supporting customers to understand that balance of how and when that happens. But absolutely, we see just so much solar and wind wanting to come online that it will not only displace the current energy usage, but make up for this electrification of everything, where we see a 2x or 3x in total consumption at the household level of what energy is used. And so we see that in Texas, we see that in the Northeast, we see that in California. Everywhere that we are just seeing a rapid increase in total amount of kilowatt hours purchased. And so we see that's why it's so important to be that center of decarbonizing that stack, as well as intelligently managing all of those assets.